The Victorian era, the times of equality, healthy capitalism, and of course, the era of mental health awareness. So, as you may have probably guessed already, the Victorian era wasn't really that great. But it would take a lot of editing and research to go into detail about every bad thing that had occurred in this period of time. So instead of doing that, let's focus on something that is both the most interesting and disturbing, that being the so-called insane asylums of the Victorian era. Okay, so how did this whole thing start? Well, at first, mental asylums seemed not to be such a bad idea, and although that might seem like something quite surprising, it really isn't when you look at the way people with mental health issues were treated prior to their invention. Before the invention of mental asylums, people treated their mentally ill family members in one of two ways. The first option was to care for them, be understanding and patient, and basically treat them like human beings. The second one was the equivalent of rage quitting after being dealt a bad hand in Hearthstone, but instead of bailing on a game, you bail on your closest relatives and leave them to rot in a ditch. And although it might not seem to be something out of the ordinary considering that it is Britain, it actually was. But then, in the early 18th century, some people decided that abandoning your relatives to die slowly wasn't fun enough, so they decided to torture them instead. And that's where mental asylums come in. People with mental illness could both voluntarily admit oneself to a mental asylum or be forcibly locked there, but the actual guidelines on whether someone needs to be admitted or not were fuzzy at best and non-existent at worst. People could be admitted in cases where they actually posed a threat to themselves or others, however many patients were people who were caught masturbating or even those who committed the most severe crime of the 19th century Britain. Opposing a male while themselves being a woman. With this long and boring introduction out of the way, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the infamous past that mental asylums of the Victorian era are known for. This thing, of course, being the treatment methods, or at least that's what they call them. First of all, let's start with the use of physical restraints, which were pretty much a cornerstone of the asylums. Yup, those straitjackets you've probably seen in a few movies, they were a real thing, and used to a degree that would make your hypothetical friend Joe reconsider if he really was born in the wrong generation. You know which one. This guy.
It's for him. I don't think we're supposed to leave our seats.
Yeah, it's a violation of railroad safety regulations.
The actual reason for restraining patients so much wasn't caused by them being dangerous in any way, or at least it wasn't the main reason for why they've been doing it. The main reason was the fact that asylums at first were designed as keeping facilities for the mentally ill, rather than places where you help them live and overcome their issues. So they were basically prisons with a fancy name and even fancier architectural design. But that's not, unfortunately, how deep this rabbit hole goes. Patients were also physically abused and forced to take ice baths in an era where catching a cold was basically a death sentence. And if you think that's bad, in some cases even the food was barely edible. Some patients were fed expired meat, old bread, and of course, tea. You know, I could forgive spoiled meat and bricks disguised as bread. However, tea? No, I think some kind of reform is needed. The last thing that caught my attention when looking at ways of treatment used in the asylums was just how frequently the patients were given or prescribed alcohol. It turns out that every patient was given a beer daily, and some that were diagnosed with melancholy were given alcohol as a treatment for their condition basically. Which also may not come as a surprise considering that this is still standard procedure in places like Poland. Okay, so I don't know how to end videos, so instead of doing that, here is a picture of a low polygon frog. Enjoy and see you next time, I guess, I don't know.